Okay.
We'll be good to go.
Okay.
Till 5 o'clock.
Amazing.
I'm going to shut the door and then you go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Enjoy it.
Thank you. Well, here we are, New York City. I'm here with Danny Townsend. Danny, nice to meet you, mate. Nice to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Travis.
Yeah, it's serendipitous. I was recording in London recently with John Allett, and as part of every episode, I ask who should I get on the show, and he mentioned Danny Townsend, and he said, "Good luck finding him. Good luck getting him." And he made the introduction kindly.
Yeah.
And luckily enough, you were here in New York City. I found an hour on the calendar, so I'm very grateful.
No, it's great to be on. It's nice to be able to spend some time with some Aussies in New York City.
Yeah, it has been really the purpose of the show is really to meet other Aussies, build that network back up, but also highlight the stories of Aussies doing amazing things on a global scale. And it's safe to say you've done that in spades. You've had a storied career, probably more so outside of Australia, but you've also done some amazing things in Australia, very public things. And now you're, very public in your role currently with SURJ.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about your current work and what you're doing now?
Yeah, look, SURJ Sport Investments is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Public Investment Fund, the PIF, of Saudi Arabia. So we're a purpose-driven investment company that's looking to deploy the sovereign wealth capital into the sports sector. We have a pretty unique mandate, which is different to a lot of private equity companies, institutional investors that are looking at sport. That we also have a responsibility to drive social change in the development of the sports sector in Saudi Arabia by the global investments that we're looking to make. So anything we do really is looking at your standard sort of growth objective out of any investment, but also what can we do with that sport that will help drive change in Saudi Arabia as a developing sport economy is on the cusp of doing some really interesting things over the next decade. So it's a bit of a different mandate to most investment companies, but it's a unique one that is actually really fun to work on.
Yeah. How does that trickle down? Because firstly, if you read the headlines around the PIF and the work that they're doing and the investment in the Sovereign Wealth Fund, it's hit and miss. There's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of questions that are asked. How does the trickle down? Why is that so important? Where the investments are then able to make an impact locally within Saudi Arabia? Yeah,
look, His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, is very much looking to drive non-oil related economy. And when you look at what Vision 2030 is all about, which is essentially diversifying the economy, but also driving significant social change across the kingdom, sport plays a big role in that. I always say sort of sport is one of those unique sectors that has a huge impact for the relevant sort of small size of the sports economy in any country. Our country, you'd argue the sports economy's probably quite big in terms of the influence it has on everyday life, but when you look at the financial magnitude of the sector, it's actually pretty small compared to a lot of industries you take for granted, like health or energy or whatever else. So I often say they're small businesses but big brands when you're talking about sport, and Australia's probably the best example of that in the world. Yeah.
I have such great memories of growing up in Australia and the sporting culture and being able to access sport. Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, is a long way from the northern beaches of Sydney.
Yeah.
So let's take it back, and I want to know what it was like growing up for Danny Townsend.
Look, I just came from your typical type of Sydney family. My parents love sport, my grandparents love sport. I was a manly guy. My grandfather loved the Manly Seagulls, and so did my dad. And I played football, but I went and watched the Manly Seagulls play at Brookie Oval because that's just what you did. Yep. And playing, surfing and doing all those things that young Aussies on the northern beaches can do was just an amazing way to grow up, which sort of, it just galvanised your love of sport because it really was the number one thing in your life as a kid growing up there. So, but having the ability to sort of play sports and then work in sports throughout my entire career has been a privilege, really.
Yeah. You called it football, not soccer.
Yeah.
Have you always called it football, or is that a recent development?
No, I've called it football for longer than I've called it soccer. Put it that way. I think it was, as growing up, I probably referred to it as soccer, but as it sort of transitioned, where the soccer community in Australia wanted to recognise the fact that it's called football in pretty much 99% of the other football playing countries in the world. The challenge we had is that there was a thing called the AFL, which was also football, a different type of football, but a dominant football code in the country. So it was probably a brave move for those at the time to sort of try and drive the change in nomenclature around the sport. But for me, it's football. Yeah.
Was that change driven by the supporters? Was it driven by the clubs? Was it driven by the leagues? What do you think was and it's a small thing in the big scale of it, but I think it's interesting. Growing up in Australia in the 80s and early 90s, all I wanted to be was a footy player. I wanted to play AFL. That was all I was concerned with, and spent a good portion of my life pursuing that goal. It was derogatory, the way that we would talk about people who played soccer and describe soccer at the time. So what was that change for you growing up, and probably being on the other end of some of that derogatory terminology, the way that people described football and soccer, to where you were when you finished your tenure with Football Australia and the A-League and working on that?
Yeah, I think football was a bit of a misunderstood beast for a long time, in that it almost denied itself its history, which is like, we're a multicultural country, and the reality is most first Australians are coming from football first countries, and therefore their ability to assimilate into community was usually done through their local football club.
Yep.
And I played in the era where you were, I was at Sydney, Croatia, or Sydney United, and there was Sydney Olympic being a Greek team, and Marconi being an Italian team. And that's what was really, really quaint about football, is that you were in this community of people that weren't from where I was from. I was from an Anglo background. I wasn't Croatian, but I got to really love the Croatian heritage by learning about it, by playing with them.
Yep.
And I think then, there was that time of, the closing down of the NSL and the opening up of the new A-League, which was more about being inclusive to everyone and not being ethnically aligned in how a club was structured. But in reality, the fabric of all those new clubs was still people coming from...
And the old clubs too.
Correct, coming from, ethnic backgrounds who came to Australia, like my family did just a longer time ago, and finding something that they shared passion in, and that was the sport of soccer or football. And I think it's taken a while for football to actually acknowledge that as a strength.
Yeah.
I think that's the case now, at least when I was there, in the last stint there in Australia, the ethnicity of football and its heritage was something that was celebrated rather than sort of avoided, which you may have said was in the 90s and 2000s the case.
Yeah. How do you think the success of the Socceroos, and the Matildas has helped with that progress in people, that may not have been football fans, soccer fans, coming along for the ride and the journey, whether it's through World Cups or Olympics?
Yeah, look, always important. Australians are parochial. They love their national teams, and when they're performing well, they're always going to generate more interest. I think, Australia, when you think about participation in soccer or football, has always been enormously strong and is today. You look at the participation rates of football compared to AFL or rugby league or rugby union. There's some of those parts don't add up to the amount of kids that play football week in, week out in this country. Yeah. Well, that country. In Australia. Which will always be its inherent strength. And, I've always had the thesis that football will prevail, sometimes in spite of itself, and we've had lots of challenges as a sport at a professional level. And we're also playing a sport that 200 odd countries in the world play.
Yep.
Who, if you're a outstanding athlete in Japan, your number one objective in life is to play for the Blue Samurai, right?
Yep.
In Australia, we divide our best talent out across AFL, rugby league, other sports, and I think that makes it challenging. And we've only got a limited population size compared to most of those other football first countries. So we're behind the eight ball a long way. But if you look at our record, making the last 16 in the World Cup, Arnie's team there did an amazing job. The Matildas are, whichever month you look at, they're in the top 10 national teams in the world. that's a pretty amazing achievement for a country that has so many other sports that we share our best athletes with. I think that gets underrepresented when we talk about performance of national teams and performance of the sport.
Yeah. How do you think the progression of the A-League and providing opportunities for our young soccer players to stay in Australia and progress their career in Australia, how do you think that's helped with the progress of the Socceroos and the Matildas?
Yeah, enormously. Like, I think when you look at, I had the opportunity to play in the NSL in a time where you'd argue was semi-professional. It became professional in the last couple of years. But the A-League is a fully professional competition. What you can earn in the A-League compared to what I could earn back in the NSL days is chalk and cheese. You can genuinely have... look at Ryan Grant at Sydney FC. He's played at that club his entire life. He's not played overseas. He's represented Australia at World Cups. Like, he's had a great career. He has never had to leave the country. Yep. Back when I was playing, if you really wanted to make something of yourself, you had to go overseas. It was, I think, when that era, at 1 year there was 180 Australians playing professional soccer somewhere outside of Australia, which tells you something. And I think that's what the A-League has done, is provide a genuine career opportunity for footballers, but I think it's also enabled us to showcase our young talent. I think in the last 12 months, the transfer fees that Australian A-League clubs are generating is enormous compared to what it was 5 or 6 years ago, because our talent is regarded on the world stage because of the way the Socceroos are performing and because of the way the Matildas are performing. Yeah.
How do you think that access to sport from a television, streaming services, YouTube, social media is helping maybe the new generation? Back when I was growing up, you probably couldn't see soccer on the TV, or you'd get one NBA game a week. Now you can watch anything and everything. Yeah,
it's probably a double-edged sword, right? Because the variety and the options young people have is enormous, and I always sort of say we're not competing with sports alone. We're competing with other entertainment propositions, and you've only got so much attention time that you can devote to, let's call it, leisure or fun entertainment-related enterprises. And I think when you look at the accessibility of football as an example, when I was growing up, you couldn't watch a Premier League game. There might have been one game a week, and there was a highlight show, and that was it. Now you can watch every game live if you want to, and I think. But you can also watch every NBA game and every NFL game, and let's not even start with the AFL, the NRL, and rugby and cricket and all those other things that we have at our disposal as young Australians. So I think the accessibility has helped, but it's also created a lot more conflict around where you can spend your leisure time, and that means you've got to work really hard to put a compelling product on television for them to engage in it.
Yeah. Sounds like you could still go and run that job, mate. I know you're busy with what you're doing now, but it sounds like you've still got a couple irons in the fire there.
Yeah, look, I just want to see it succeed, as a ex-player and someone that, really wants to see football meet its potential. Again, I still believe in all the things I believed in back in the time when I was there, that it is going to be a force in Australian sport. It's just, I think it's an inevitability, and it's just about timing and execution. And I think, there's some really good green shoots in football, but I'm also not one of those guys that is a football tragic and can't appreciate what the others are doing. The AFL's done a tremendous job over the years in creating a national sport, and truly national, with the expansion they've had over the last couple of decades. And, rugby league's a great TV product, like, it's compelling stuff. So I think, I like to see all of the sports progress, but, I think football is unique. It's a global game, and I don't think any of the others can really match that. So once you really know how to harness the energy that you get out of being part of what is the biggest sport in the world, and us as Australians playing our role in that, I think that's when football really starts to pump. Yeah.
I think we've also developed our own personality in the world of football as well. We are uniquely Australian. And, I'm a casual fan, World Cups and, major matches and Olympics. But I love the personality and the culture that we bring to the game. There's a fierceness, there's a little bit of rough and tumble, there's a little bit of chippiness that, some other countries maybe not bring, because it's a, more traditional approach that they have and their culture brings to sport. But I want to talk a little bit about your second career. Call it your football career, your first career. What was that like for you, transitioning out of that and then moving abroad and kind of building a career in business outside of Australia?
Yeah, I was sort of really lucky in that, I had the opportunity to play sports for a living. And I was also lucky enough to probably understand my capability at a point where I knew that my body wasn't going to be able to sustain a long career in football. And when you get to know that early on in your career, you make the most of the time you have as an athlete, but then you have one eye on what you're going to have to do for the rest of your life, which is a lot longer than your professional sports career. So I knew very early on I wasn't going to play a long time. So, whilst my teammates may have gone to the beach after training, I'd go to university, and I knew I had to go and get a degree, and I did that while I was playing. So when I was ready to stop playing, I had something behind me to fall back on, and always wanted to work in sports. It was my passion, and was able to set up the business that we set up in Australia. And look, with all those things, you go into them with, best intentions, but you never sort of expect to sort of do what we did in terms of build a business across 22 countries in, with 2,000 staff. It was a journey, and it was an amazing learning experience. But it was a privilege to be able to do that, and I think that's, when you look back on that part of my career, it was probably the most fulfilling.
Yeah. What was it like when you kind of first decided that you needed to move abroad to continue to build a business or, grow your career? What was that like?
I think one thing that Aussies bring to the table is they're ambitious, and they understand that the scale of the Australian market is only so big.
Yep.
And if you are going to want to make something serious of a company, and you've got the ambition to do it, it's not to say you can't have an Australian-based business that operates in Australia and not be successful. I think that there's lots of examples of those. But we always had ambition to go and do something impactful in the global sports economy, and we were lucky enough to go on and do that. But I think there's something inside Aussies, and you'll know through the people you interview that there are a huge amount of them who have cut their teeth in what is probably the most competitive sports market on the planet.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why those people can't go on and do great things. You look, there's more professional sports teams in Sydney than there are in the tri-state area of New York.
Right.
And about, 8 times the population. So you've got to be good. My interpretation of my time here is there's a lot of average companies that make a lot of money in the United States. Average companies don't make money in sport in Australia because it's just too small.
Yeah.
So, there's always that ambition to go do something bigger.
Yeah. What did you take from... What lessons did you take from building and growing your own business to then taking to your work with, within soccer and football in Australia?
Yeah, look, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, I don't think you can succeed. And we were very passionate about what we were doing in building the business we had, the agency business we had. And then, when I came back to Australia, having sold that business in 2016, I had the opportunity just emerge to go into Sydney FC and do the job there. And I didn't really ever think I'd go back into football in any administrative capacity. That wasn't my thing. I was a business guy, right?
Yeah.
But I thought, you know what, I've been away for 13, 14 years, however long it was, and got back to Australia. And my network had sort of moved on a bit too, because when you're away that long, the people that you're working with 13, 14 years ago are no longer in the roles they were, or they might be out of the industry. So I thought, going into something that I'm passionate about, Sydney FC is a great football club. The people that were at that football club at the time, a lot of them I knew.
Yeah. And
I thought it was a great landing role just to probably come back, catch my breath, spend more time with my kids. I left Australia in 2004 with a 2-month-old daughter.
Yeah.
And a wife that was thinking we were crazy, and returned 14 years later with 2 teenage daughters who'd never lived in Australia. So getting back into Australia and spending time with them as a normal sort of family was pretty important, and it was a great time.
How did your kids connect back to Aussie culture, or how was that for the assimilation for them?
Weird, because they always thought of themselves as Australian, although they'd never spent really much time in Australia at all. So, when you think about teenage girls and saying, hey, look, we're living in New York and we're going to move back to Sydney, they couldn't wait to get back to Sydney. Like, they were always keen to spend a lot of their childhood, I suppose, in Sydney, which is often rare, because typically when kids are growing up abroad, they lose that sort of affiliation with the country, and therefore their friends are there and they don't want to leave. But my girls were absolutely keen. They had these horrible American accents, and fortunately, like within about 2 months, they lost them, and they were very much Australian and still are.
Yeah, that's cool. My kids are very much not Australian.
Yeah.
My daughter was born in Canada. My son born here in the US. Their connection is making fun of me and my accent, making fun of the words that I say, and Bluey. That's about it.
Yeah, well, there you go. Ours have got this weird blended sort of vocabulary where they'll refer to trash and pudding and all these things that, you know, Aussie kids go, well, what are you talking about? What's pudding? It's like, that's your dessert. Yeah. It's like, so they've got this blended sort of English, US sort of vocabulary, which is sort of cool.
It was funny the other day. I was sitting down with my kids and they make fun of me for saying tomato.
Yeah.
They're tomato.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
So I talked to them. I'm like, tomato. Yeah. And they're like, tomato. I'm like,
No, they haven't got it quite right, have they?
But they haven't. So what was that? Look, were you always thinking that you would go back to Australia? Was that always the goal?
Yeah, I think so. Look, we like a lot of Aussies, you go away we're going away for 2 years, and you end up staying for over a decade. And I think we had a unique journey that we were on, but I think you've got family, extended family, and you know this, living abroad, you know, there are things you sacrifice. You miss out on a lot of things. You miss out on friends' weddings and you know, family members' important sort of milestones, and those sacrifices you just got to make to live that lifestyle and do what you need to do in your career. But I think we always felt that we would love to get back and at least give our kids a high school education in Australia, and that's what we did. And you know, we probably in the back of our minds knew we'd probably go back at some point, just given what I do. You know, the opportunities are probably more international than they are domestic, and it probably came a couple of years too early for us, but it was an opportunity we really couldn't refuse.
Yeah. When you first moved, was it helpful to be an Aussie with the Aussie accent and the Aussie bravado, or was it detrimental?
No, I think it's, you know, Aussies are pretty well liked from my experience. Everywhere I've lived, you know, being an Aussie is a little bit different. And you sort of, you chat to someone, oh, you're an Aussie. Oh, okay. And nowadays, everyone's always got a connection to an Aussie somehow, because we've spent, you know, such a long time infiltrating the global sports business. But just even socially, you know, when we're living in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, you know, there'd be always a couple of Aussie families. Everyone would know someone. Yep. And I think when you're an expat, you know, there's this sort of unwritten rule where you look after each other, which is really cool. When we got to Singapore first time, we had this suddenly out of nowhere, a group of families and friends that just came out of nowhere who latched onto us and helped us through that time. And when you don't, you know, when you got a wife who's just given birth, you've never had kids before, you're going like, what are we doing with this thing? Yeah. And you're in a foreign country and you're trying to work it all out. Having people who step in and go, well, we'll help you out here because we were you once. And I think that's what's great about Aussies abroad. You sort of get into this community of people that are your family for a period of time, because your immediate family is with you, but your extended family is not. And therefore these people who are strangers to you or who were connected to you by someone who knows someone become really important parts of your life.
Yeah. I find that Aussies always, well, not always, that's a generalisation, but I find that Aussies are also very open to paying it forward. So your experience of having people come out of the woodwork and give you a hand and help guide you through that process, I'm sure you've been able to do that for others. Are there examples of folks that have come along and you get the introduction and you're like, all right, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to figure out, and you've been able to help other Aussies?
I think lots, as you've been away longer, you become the one who's doing the helping. And I think you just, like I said, it's almost like this unwritten rule that you feel obligated to do that. And I do that in work. Like when you see young Aussies working in the sports business who will just randomly message me on LinkedIn, I'll respond to them and say, hey, look, I can help you with this person, introduce you to that person. If I can employ them directly, I'll do that, because I think that's just about being a good person and being an Aussie who wants to look after our own.
Yeah. Tell me about how that is showing up in your work now. Obviously, English-speaking countries that you've lived in, maybe closer culturally now in Saudi Arabia. How is the cultural differences, good, bad, or indifferent, showing up for you in your new role?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one for me, and one of the reasons I took the role at the time I took it, I don't think I'd take it, and I was looking at, there was a couple of other opportunities that came up in the UK in football that I'd said no to, and the US I'd said no to because I wasn't motivated to do something back where I'd been before. And when this came up, it was like, well, this is really unique. It's something different, and it's I think a point in time in that country's history that you'll never replicate. So to be there and have a front row seat for that was compelling. Outside of the work mandate, just the social change that's going on and being able to witness that and playing a role in that, particularly in sport, was something that led me to take the role, because I think if that role was in New York, I probably wouldn't have taken it because it wouldn't have had all those ancillary benefits that I just talked to.
Yeah. How has it been on the family? You know your family's still in Australia. You're a year into the role now.
Yeah.
What's it like? What's it been like for them, and what are they kind of looking forward to or the most excited about? You know, as you progress in the role.
Yeah, I think that we always said when we collectively as a family agreed to sort of do this, because it is a family decision, right? At the end of the day, I might have my own ambition, but if the rest of the family is saying no, we don't want you to do that, then you don't do it. Yeah. But you know, they understood the opportunity, and I think they're worldly kids, and my wife's very worldly, having spent so much time abroad. They were like you got to do this. Like, this is something you just have to do, and we'll make it work. Yeah. You know, there are benefits to doing that because you're around the world, and they come and meet me wherever I am, and we spend some, you know, pretty interesting time together in interesting places as a consequence. But there's also stuff that you miss, right? Like, you know, when they're sitting down at dinner at night and they're FaceTiming me and I'm sitting having breakfast in Riyadh, it's a bit of a weird feeling. But that's not forever. You've also got to realise that our kids are getting older. They're going to have their own lives, and at some point you've got to get on with yours and utilise the benefits that you generate from doing what you're doing. And you know, if my younger daughter's probably going to go to college in the US, and so she'll be over there. My elder one will be at Sydney Uni where she is now, and my wife will be bouncing around between wherever I am and they are, and that's just our family. That's what it is. So
there's no one way to do it.
No, like I don't think any of these things are really linear, unless you want them to be. Right. Like if you choose a certain lifestyle that's simple in the sense that you're not overcomplicating things. Like, our life is complicated, like trying to work out where we all are at different times. And my wife did one of those Life 360 things where I think it was a couple of months ago, all four of us were on different continents at the same time. And she's just like, the world's gone mad. What are we doing?
What are we doing?
But it is what it is.
Yeah, technology helps, though. You talk about FaceTime, and I get, I FaceTime my kids all the time when I'm not with them. And it is pretty, FaceTime my parents. And, my kids are young enough now that my son's never met my parents.
Yeah, right.
He was born in, COVID, and we just haven't been back to Australia with him. So the whole relationship is via FaceTime, which, it's not great. I'd love for them to spend more time, but it's the reality of... Yeah,
and look, it helps. It helps. Yeah. It's, when I don't have a FaceTime session with my kids or whatever else, you sort of feel like you're missing something. Yeah. And a phone call's not quite the same. A FaceTime video is always good to feel like you're connected. So,
yeah. What's a day-to-day look like for you? You have a very unique role. There's not a lot of folks in the world doing what you're doing, if any, other than you. So I'd love to learn more about what it looks like for you on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, look, it depends where I am, right? If I'm I live sort of two very different lives. When I'm in Riyadh and working in the office, there's that lifestyle, and then it's when I'm traveling. We invest in global sports, so therefore I'm not doing a lot of investing in Riyadh. So if I'm doing deals, I'm doing them somewhere else. Yep. So there's a requirement, and the sports is an industry where it is relationship heavy. Yep. The reason I'm in my role is because of my relationships I have around the world in sports that enable me to have conversations that you couldn't otherwise have. But I think the balance between having my time in Riyadh, where I'm very much dialed in to my team there, and I go to the gym twice a day and get healthy and do all those things because I've got the time. when you're on the road and you're travelling, you're typically, meetings all day, you're jumping off planes, you're going to this, you're going to that, you're having a breakfast with that person, a lunch with that person, a dinner with that person, and then you're back again. So it is tiring and quite hectic. So having that balance between the two, and then when I get back to Australia, I try and do as little as I can, is just focus on being around the family and enjoying some in-person time.
Yeah. You've made some, as in, the group that you're leading, have made some investments in some pretty amazing sports thus far.
Mm-hmm.
What are you most proud of? And what are you most looking forward to as far as opportunities that are in the pipeline? Obviously, don't share anything that's not privy or public, but what are you most proud of and what are you most looking forward to?
I think if you take PFL, and we're very early on our journey, right? The SURJ as a business is only over sort of 18 months old, and the PIF has obviously been investing in sport now for some time. But if you look at what we've done in MMA, and part of our mandate, as I said, is to sort of invest in global sports leagues, but bring something back to the kingdom that will enable pathways and development opportunities for athletes or for administrators or for agencies that serve the industry, those type of things. The PFL is an interesting investment that we made early on, and part of that investment was ensuring that we had an MMA league in MENA. So PFL MENA was born. Yep. We've got PFL Europe, we've got PFL Africa that Francis Ngannou is the chair of. So there's, we've created opportunities for Middle East and North African athletes to ply their trade in MMA, which they couldn't do before. And Hatan Al Saif is a Saudi female MMA athlete who's just taken the world by storm, and she's now one of the most recognisable athletes or faces in Saudi Arabia, and she would never be where she is today without that platform. Right. Now, of course, she's amazing. I don't want to discount the work she's put in and how hard she has done to get where she is, but that platform enabled her to earn a living out of MMA and have a professional pathway that will, is probably unlimited potential. So, that's the type of thing we want to do. At the end of the day, we're an investment company, so our investments must deliver returns. Putting the sovereign wealth capital to work and delivering returns is critical for the future of the economy. But having those anecdotal opportunities to see the work you're doing actually manifest themselves into a outcome for an individual in a country that never would have had that opportunity before is pretty satisfying.
Yeah. A lot of my background has been in endurance sports, triathlon, cycling. Sat down with John, and my question to him was really around the sustainability of cycling and the model around professional cycling. The trickle down that we talked about earlier, whether it's running, swimming, riding your bike, is perfectly suited for participation on a general public level. What's your perspective on endurance sports, cycling, triathlon? There's been a lot of investment from the Middle East in triathlon. There's been a lot of investment in cycling from the Middle East. What's your perspective on those two sports in particular?
We're big on it. If you think about our mandate and Vision 2030 is about mobility and getting people moving, whether that's running, swimming, walking, anything that's going to get them moving and improving their well-being is really important. But I think as a sport investor, what we look at is foundationally strong sports that have been around a long time, that serve the biggest economies in the world, have significant participation bases, that have probably lost their way a bit from a product perspective and a governance perspective. They've almost governed themselves into forgetting about the consumer, the fan, the participant, and focused on the structure of the sport and not changed it. And we're in a very critical time over the next decade, I think, where sports who aren't willing to transform and change and put the customer at the centre of what they do may cease to exist. I think we will see sports who we know and love today not exist in the form they do today in 10 years if they don't change. So I think when you look at those foundationally strong sports and the product apathy they've sort of fallen into, if our capital can be transformative in taking what is a great sport and that's struggling a bit and secure its future by deploying our capital positively to drive a change, I think that's going to be something I really look forward to and something we're focused on.
When you describe the customer, I think about in cycling and triathlon, to stay on the topic, I think of the customer as someone who's either participating in the sport maybe watching the sport at a professional level,
Yeah.
really professional cycling or professional triathlon doesn't really even need to exist when you talk about the customer who's able to just go and ride their bike.
Yeah.
Or someone who might sign up for their first Ironman or their first local triathlon. And when you talk about the apathy and the over-governance, they're two sports that I can pinpoint right now and say I think both of those check those boxes. What's your perspective on that, where there's no appeal from a broadcasting standpoint unless you're a super fan of triathlon or cycling? You're not really watching. Obviously, there's the native audience within certain European countries that'll go out and watch the major tours, but there's these races that happen every day and every weekend that have no spectators.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think that's the opportunity, right? When you think about sports fans, anyone that plays the sport is the most engaged because they're spending their own time participating in that sport. So if you can connect the participant with the elite, then you got a secure sort of pyramid that you can then cultivate commercially. And I think that's where sports have lost their way a bit, in the sense that, they've been focused on eyeballs on television and not focused on how do I build a digital economy around my sport that I can then manage a customer journey. And whether that be I play the sport, I don't watch the sport, fine, but at least if you're playing the sport, I know who you are and I know what you like to do, and I can serve you things that are going to deliver utility in your life, right?
Yep.
That could be just the first part of the journey. But if you've got a participant who then likes the aspirational end of the pyramid, which is I want to watch the pros, I want to get into the sport in more detail, then you've got them longer and you've got other ways you can monetize them. That's the trick. And I think that's going to be the key to how sports sustain themselves in the future. The reality is that you need inspiration to do something.
Yep.
And the top of the pyramid, the pro end, is what delivers those inspirational stories. And we're seeing them now with, the unscripted stuff on Netflix or Amazon or wherever else, where you're getting behind the scenes, you're learning more about the story and you're becoming inspired. You probably saw Unchained on the Tour de France thing. Like, I was not a big cycling fan. I always appreciated it.
Yep.
I always rode a bike,
Yep.
but I wouldn't say I was a participant of cycling nor a fan. I watched that and I had to engage because the stories were amazing. The athletes were clearly off the charts.
Yep.
So that was worth spending my time on. And I think once you start to do that, then you've got a customer.
Yeah.
And what the sport does with me as a customer from that point on will determine whether they succeed or fail.
Yeah. I love it. I'm a big documentary fan, and
me too.
I watched the Receiver
Yeah,
series.
I did too. Yeah.
Um,
Now you watch Devontae Adams, don't you?
all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like a big
Same.
fan. Amon St. Ra.
Brown- St. Ra,
I'm like,
yeah,
oh my
it's awesome.
god, it's so good.
Yeah.
And then I just watched the Red Sox one.
Oh yeah, I haven't
the
watched that
comeback.
yet.
I actually binged it. It was 3 episodes.
Yeah.
I was like, I'll watch one and I'll go to bed. Watch 3 of them. It was back to back to back. I'm like, fascinating.
I watched the WWE one. I hate WWE,
Right.
and I watched that and Vince McMahon and all that.
Yeah.
That craziness, and I had no appreciation for that until you watch that and went,
Yeah.
actually, he's an entertainer. Like
Yep.
it's quite amazing.
Well, I remember growing up as a kid, like my brother and I used to watch Friday Night Raw when we were kids, the wrestling, whatever, and see some of the train wrecks of the lives that they lived
Oh, yeah.
on the back end.
Sadly, yeah.
Yeah, but also like as they're participating night to night, going city to city, and they're they're drinking 20, 30 beers a night between shows and stuff.
And they're jumping off the top turnbuckle
Like,
and
that's
hurting their
amazing.
back. Yeah, it was
Amazing.
pretty crazy stuff.
I want your perspective because I was in London recently.
Yeah.
Went to the NFL London game,
Mhm.
Jacksonville and Chicago.
Yep.
Friend of mine, owner of got tickets through the owner of the team. It was amazing. We were sitting in, the wives and girlfriends section and the families, and it was amazing. But it was so cool to see football fans, NFL fans, with all the different jerseys. I think all the 32 teams are represented from my quick tally. What's your perspective on leagues like the NFL or the NBA and others bringing their sport to other markets and showcasing what they're doing?
Globalization is everything.
Yeah.
The world's becoming a smaller place. The US is the biggest sports market in the world, but it can't stop there. Like, you look at the NBA and what they've done in terms of building a global brand. The NFL is always going to have a harder task because no one plays the sport outside of the United States, but they've created an amazing product. So I think you'll see more of that. I think you'll see the US sports, and I know that when I speak to them, they're very much about how do we expand into Europe, how do we expand into Africa and the Middle East and Asia, and I think they've sort of done it, I would say, haphazardly in the past because it wasn't that important to them. I think now it's critically important to them, and you see what the NFL are doing with, regular season games, in different markets, different stadiums. I think you'll see more of it, and I think it's going to be good for those sports to become more global.
How does your work cross over with the investments the PIF have already made in, call it Live or Newcastle United and some of the other investments they've made? How does that crossover work currently?
Yeah, it doesn't do a lot of crossover at the moment, largely because they obviously predated SURJ's establishment. But we obviously work closely with the PIF international guys who did those deals. Obviously, the Live Golf investment has been one that's sort of been going through that reconciliation process with PGA Tour, and I don't get too involved in that because we're sort of inoculated from that in a way at SURJ. But certainly golf is one of those sports that was ripe for change. We want to see global tours. You want to see the best athletes in any sport competing with each other every weekend, not choosing where to play because they're getting paid a check to play in a different tournament or different tour, which happens in tennis, happens in golf, happens in cycling, happens in these sports that are foundationally strong, but their product has sort of lost its way a bit. And I think, golf certainly, I think, on the right path once everything is resolved to bounce back to being, a global superpower in the sports space.
Yeah. I want to touch on tall poppy syndrome. It's something that I bring up every episode. Growing up, it was obviously something that you're aware of.
Yeah.
How has that shown up for you in your careers? And how has that impacted the way that you go about life as Danny, or a businessman, or a father, or how has that impacted you?
Look, it annoys me in the sense that when I observe the way Australia sort of is, I see it less so in sport. I don't see a lot of it in sport, and I probably observe it in other sectors and go, that's why would you treat that person like that? They've achieved a lot. You should respect them, and simple. The rules of life are you should be respectful and do all those things. If you do that, to me, I always and when I was in the A League and dealing with a bunch of stuff there, for me it was like, well, I know who I am, and the people that matter know who I am, and they know why I'm doing it, and they know my intentions. And if there's someone in the grandstand who's yelling abuse at you because they don't agree with what you've done, that's their right. That's fine. They're worth. They may not have the understanding of what you were doing and why you were doing it, and you sort of can't expect them to because they're not in the room.
Right.
So you just got to, you got to listen to it and respect it and move on, and don't let it sort of affect you, because if you read everything and you hear everything and you react to everything, you go mad.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, in those type of roles, you've just got to be disciplined around being clear on what your conviction around doing something is and feeling good about that. And if people don't agree with it, then so be it.
How do you protect yourself from that? You've been in public roles, public-facing roles where people are having opinions, and everyone's got a platform now with Twitter and social media. But how do you kind of protect yourself from the criticism?
I don't really protect myself from it. At the end of the day, it is what it is. You you've just almost got to shut it out a little bit. But if you don't listen to it, then you're not trying to improve as well. Because sometimes you get criticised for doing something that you thought was the right thing, and then you might go, well, actually, I'm listening to what the feedback is, maybe I should pivot.
Yeah.
So I think if you bury your head in the sand, that's a problem.
Yep.
So you've got to keep an open mind on things, and I've always tried to do that. But I think you actually want to protect your family and your people around you more, your staff, and these, because if you're in a leadership role, you've got to have resilience. Doesn't matter what leadership role it is, whether it's on the field, off the field, in business, wherever.
Yep.
Resilience is everything. And if you don't have the resilience, then you shouldn't be in that job. But sometimes the people around you don't have that same level of resilience, and therefore they're vulnerable to listening, hearing, and not being able to cope with some of that stuff.
Yep.
So I always try and focus on, well, okay, I can sort of deflect it in a way, but I want to make sure the people around me aren't suffering.
Yeah. What is your leadership style? It seems like you're a gregarious guy. You're seem like a great leader. You've got a positive attitude. How do you lead your team? What do you kind of think about when you pull on the suit every morning and you think, how am I going to lead my team today?
I think you want to empower them. I think that's the key. Like I'm not a massive micromanager. People will probably laugh and say yes, he is. but I like to think that you give people freedom to learn and make mistakes. And I never really get upset with people that make mistakes in business, as long as they're having a go.
Yep.
What I can't tolerate is people not having a go. So if you're going to empower people, let them do stuff. If they make mistakes, you can't get angry. You just got to go, hey, look, that didn't work. Maybe we should have thought about that differently, and we do it differently next time. Learn, fine,
Yep.
move on. Don't dwell on things. But I think more broadly, when I look at what you look back on your career or parts of your career, what we did at Repicom as a business, I go around the world now to sports conferences and talk at them and do all this other stuff, and the amount of alumni that I either employed as their first job out of college in the US or in London or wherever it was, who are now doing really meaningful roles in major sports organisations, who
Must be super cool.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah.
Like you walk around and go, hey, he's at FIFA now, he's at Premier League, he's at the NBA, and
Yeah.
she's now working here or there, and you sort of go, wow. I remember when they walked into my office and I interviewed them, and they were a kid,
Yep.
and now they've gone on to great things. So I think that as a leader, when you look and reflect back, your impact you've had on them and giving them a pathway to have a great career in the industry is as gratifying as anything you achieve yourself.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Mm.
Very cool. I like to wrap up with a couple of different things.
Don't give me that question on who you should interview next.
Well,
I didn't think
that's
that
coming.
through. God, okay.
That's coming. Who
Okay.
else should I get on the show?
Come back to me in a bit. I
All right.
need to think that through while I'm...
Okay. All right.
I'm
So we'll
nervous.
move on to the quickfire questions,
Okay.
and then we'll come back to it.
Okay.
So there's 8 questions that I asked that are standard across the board, and then there's a special Danny Townsend question.
Okay.
All right. Here we go. Let me find it. Vegemite, yes or no?
No way.
No.
No way.
Tell me more.
Horrible.
Really?
Looks like poo.
It does.
Who's
look like poo.
eating stuff that looks like poo?
You might be the first one that's been a
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, don't get me...
But you know what?
So-
Some people might just say yes because they feel like they have
Yeah,
to.
no, I'll give you it straight.
Straight.
It looks like poo. I don't eat it.
That's a no. All right. You heard it here first. Best Australian beach
Palm Beach.
in Sydney, Palm Beach. There's a Palm Beach on the Gold Coast, which is
Yeah,
also pretty amazing.
Yes, I'm a Sydney guy, and
Yeah.
Palm Beach is my favourite beach.
Right. So the next question, I think I know where you're going to go. Sydney or Melbourne?
Really? Really?
Say it. We've got to get it on record.
Sydney, of course. Now, look, to be fair, I'm also not one of those guys that is a Sydney, Melbourne.
Staunch,
I love Melbourne. It's probably a more European city than Sydney. They're just different cities. They're both great. But yeah, I'm obviously biased to Sydney, but I do love Melbourne.
Yeah. You wound that one back pretty quick. Mate.
Yeah, well, I thought it better. Half the people listening are probably from there. No, but I genuinely believe that it's a cool city.
It's funny. Most people who are from Sydney will say Sydney, and then everyone else has thus far had said Melbourne.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I can understand that.
They're
Like,
great cities. They're both
yeah.
great cities.
When in your travels, when you see a lot of people will love Sydney for its picturesque
Yep.
sort of side and its lifestyle, outdoors, beaches. But when you talk about Europeans particularly, I think most of them that I meet say Melbourne because it's probably more familiar to them because of the culture and those things. So.
Sydney's a great tourist city too. Obviously, there's a lot of landmarks, a lot of history there. I went back with my fiance Elizabeth. We went back in March and we did the bridge climb, which I'd never done before.
Yeah, right.
Which was super cool, and it was fun showing her around. And I hadn't spent a lot of time in Sydney because growing up, you don't really travel there for tourism purposes. It's just another city. But it was kind of cool to be a tourist in Australia and show her around as well. It was fun.
Yeah, cool.
What's your who's an Australian that you look up to?
Wow, that's a good question. My dad. He's Australian, and I look up to him.
Yep. Tell me more.
My family came from sort of running retail businesses, and he and his father created a business that was sort of the mainstay of our family for a long time, and he got up every day and slugged it out and worked really, really hard. And I think I think work ethic is such a critical part to success. you just got to keep turning up and you got to put in. And if you do that, then your chances of succeeding are usually pretty high. And I think you learn work. I learned work ethic from him. I learned, taking risks, entrepreneurial spirit, those things. It's probably a cliched thing to say that, but I think when you are trying to work out what to do as a young fella, it's hard, right? You go, what do I want to do in my life? And you go, well, okay, I can see what he's doing day in, day out, then that's working because I'm having a pretty good life. So if I keep doing the same, then I've got half a chance.
What do you think he would say about what you're doing now and the career that you've built?
He thinks I'm crazy.
Yeah.
No, look, I think, look, in the main, I'm sure hopefully he's proud, but I think at the same time, he's pragmatic and he knows that, what I do has got, ups and downs in it. And particularly when I was in the domestic role, that's tough because it's very public. What I'm doing is very public globally in the sports sector. It's not really public. Like, I'm not walking down the street here on Fifth Avenue getting people stop me and go, hey, you're doing great work in the sports investment space. Yeah. No one really gives a shit. So I think when you're in those public roles, the influence you have is perceived to be bigger because they are public. And I think you got to have people around you that understand that because there is, like I said before, there's sort of blowback. Yep. Goes beyond just you. It goes into the people around you. But I think I think the fact that, as a family, we've sort of been able to do what we've done so far, and we're still in that journey. Got a long way to go, but I'm sure, he sort of looks at what I'm doing as an extension to what he did when he built the business that he had. Yeah,
very cool. That's awesome. What's your favourite place in the world to relax?
Ibiza.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Actually, I would say Palm Beach first, but that's cheating because it's sort of in our backyard. But Ibiza, we family love that. We go there pretty much every year. And when we lived in London, we spent a lot of time there. We've got some great friends there that we're with. And it's not what it says on the tin, right? Everyone thinks, you go to Ibiza.
That's right. That's
party place. Like you go there to relax and eat good food and swim and have a good time. It's a great place.
Yeah. What do you think about that Spanish culture?
It's great. Yeah. Look, it's sort of similar to Aussies in a way. Pretty laid back and enjoy the outdoors, and the weather is great at that time of year in the summer. And I think there are a lot of similarities. They love their sports. So I think when I go to Spain and you're there and you're seeing how they drop everything to watch whatever's on at the time. And I was there last summer when Alcaraz was playing in the final of Wimbledon and sitting at a beach bar, and everyone's huddled around this tiny little television to watch it. And those things that's classic. That's what Australians would do if we were trying to watch one of our athletes do something special.
Yeah, what a great memory too. Like I often think about those kind of moments in time where you're witnessing something incredible happening and you're just present in the moment, but you can kind of look back and think, wow, that was special that I got to experience that. Yeah. They're the things that the memories that I keep very close to me is that kind of some of the unexpected things. Yeah,
and that's the beauty of sport, right? They create moments in your life that you remember. Yep. You remember where you were when X happened or Y happened, and that's what's great about the industry we're in. Yeah,
I think fondly about the time I had in London a couple of weeks ago with the sitting around and the friends and family and hearing the banter and the stories and
it's great.
And then I was in Buffalo. A buddy of mine had amazing tickets at the Bills game 2 winters ago, and it was a unbelievable snowstorm.
Yeah, right.
And we were sitting in the club seats. We got the heaters, and I felt like we were cheating a little bit because
all the folks get in the tailgate,
the shirts off down with the snow. But I'll never forget that, the snow blowing in on our face, and just moments. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's amazing. I love that you're able to do work that translates to that and creates those moments and helps create those moments.
Yeah, and that's also a privilege, to be able to be in a sector where you are creating memories for other people through the things you're doing, good, bad, or indifferent, really. That's sort of the nice thing about what we do.
Yeah, love it. What's one Aussie habit that you've kept while living abroad?
Aussie habit I've kept. I suppose thongs.
Yep.
Which my wife hates. But, any chance you can wear thongs, which you can't do a lot in what I do.
Yep.
And calling them thongs as well, and not feeling like you're saying something inappropriate.
Yep.
I think thongs, it's something that I've always keep a pair of thongs with me wherever I am.
Love it. I'm off to Mexico tomorrow, so I've packed the thongs. I'm ready to
smart.
put them in the backpack as soon as I get there.
That's all you need.
Whip them on.
That's all you need.
Yeah. Pair of boardies and a t-shirt, and you're all set.
You're ready to go.
Love it. Who's an Aussie, dead or alive, that you'd like to have dinner with?
Oof, an Aussie dead or alive that I'd like to have dinner with. I would say Warnie. So I got to know Warnie sort of in a sort of very loose way a bunch of years ago, working on the IPL in India. But yeah, he'd be a great guy to have dinner with. I think he's got some great stories, and he seems like one of those guys. In my experience with him, was always warm and open and friendly, and I think you'd have a good time with Warnie at dinner, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think there'd be a few laughs.
Absolutely.
Some good stories, some good banter.
Yeah.
Love it. What's your go-to coffee order?
Flat white.
Sugar? No sugar?
No sugar, flat white.
Flat white.
Full milk.
Where do you find makes them the best?
Do you know what? So I in my building in Saudi, there's a Jones the Grocer, which, funnily enough, when we were living in Singapore, there was a Jones the Grocer, an Australian-founded company that had sort of, I think it's sold a few times since it set up, but in Singapore, we'd go to a Jones the Grocer in Dempsey Hill for coffee because it made good Aussie flat white coffee. Yep. And when I moved to Saudi, I found this building, and randomly I went downstairs, and the cafe in the lobby is a Jones the Grocer,
right? And
they do fantastic flat whites. So I'm lucky. It's just there, and
serendipitous.
You
manifested the flat white. In the
totally. So I go to the gym and go down and get my flat white every morning and sit on my back and do a bit of work. It's nice.
Yeah, sounds magic. All right, this is the Danny question.
Okay.
What's one unexpected lesson that you've learned from working with fans across such diverse football cultures?
Yeah, look, I think loyalty. I'm a super loyal person, and sometimes that's not reciprocated particularly in football, because I think self-interest and passion around things that they necessarily believe in will divide loyalties to a point where what you think you're going to get in return you don't get, and that's challenging for me, because I will always be loyal to someone that's that's loyal to me. So I think when you're dealing with fans, by definition, fan is short for fanatic. If you're fanatical about something, you're in the extreme end of the spectrum, and therefore you behave somewhat differently to you might in your everyday life.
Yep.
And fans sit in that category, and with that you're always going to get different opinions, and you're going to have divided loyalties. And I think when you're working with people in a business side of football, those same principles apply, because they're working in football because they're probably fanatical about the game and they love it and they've invested in it. So you tend to not get the loyalty that I think you earn by being reciprocal about how you deal with people. And that was one thing I learned, and learned it pretty hard when I was in football.
Yeah. How do you think that's shaped what you're doing now, or what was the kind of the lesson that you took from that?
Yeah, the hard part about it is you don't want to change the way you are because of the way other people are.
Yep.
So, if you that loyalty that you hold important to you isn't reciprocated, don't throw it out the door.
Yeah.
Just go, okay, that's just not for that person. Move on, right? And they're sort of dead to you as people, because, again, when you're loyal to when loyalty is important to you, when that gets breached, I discard people from my life, because it's like that person's not a person that shares.
It's a value that you hold dearly.
They don't share the same values, and if that's the case, I'm not going to waste my time with them. You have limited time on the planet, let alone with the people that you want to spend that time with. So I don't waste time with people that don't share those same values. So, but it's important not to then take yourself down to that level, because you give up. Because there are more loyal people on this planet than disloyal ones. You just got to surround yourself with the ones that are.
Yeah, and start from seeing the good in people. Right? Start from that.
Yeah, and don't lose sight of what you're really trying to achieve in something, because you know, like, go back to that point I made around resilience. You know, it's probably easy sometimes to be able to say that hasn't worked out for whatever reason, blame other people or do whatever, and then just go, I'll give up on that and I'll go do something else. Like, if you lose sight of the reasons you're doing something and the conviction you have around getting that done, you should be able to stay the course despite being, you know, let down along the way.
Yep. Love it. Back to the magic question. Who do you think we should get on the show? Who's another Aussie living abroad that you think are...
It's a guy actually that I've been working a bit with lately in Saudi, but he's also been around the traps. Xavier Campbell. Okay. Do you know Xavier?
No.
Xavier he was the CEO of Essendon he took over during the whole supplements scandal and sort of steered them through that, and then he spent a lot of time in a high profile role in a very sort of goldfish bowl of a city like Melbourne as it relates to AFL. And gone on and invested in a lot of different things, and took his family to France and sort of set up shop there just because he could. And he's doing a bunch of work with me in Saudi on certain things. He's got a great story, and his story is about to continue to change, which I'm sure your listeners will find interesting.
Yeah. All right, let's make it happen.
Yeah, I'll tee it up.
Great. Danny, you're a star.
Pleasure,
Appreciate
mate.
it, mate.
Thanks for having me on. That's awesome. Thanks, Trav.
Thanks, mate.
Good man.
Cheers. That was great, man.
Cool, man.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Yeah.